What is the purpose of the respiratory system? The purpose of the respiratory system is to deliver oxygen to our body cells and remove carbon dioxide from our body cells. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out the carbon dioxide. And the overall purpose is to make ATP. ATP is made by the breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen, which results in carbon dioxide, water, and 36 ATP. This oxygen must be delivered to the body cells where cellular respiration takes place, and the carbon dioxide, which is a toxic byproduct, must be removed from the body cells so that we may breathe it out. So we call this process cellular respiration, and it takes place in our body cells. So the entire respiratory function involves bringing the oxygen into the lungs, carrying it from the lungs to the body cells. And then once in the body cells, the carbon dioxide is released, and that carbon dioxide must be transported back to the lungs where we can breathe it out. Respiratory function can be broken down into 5 stages. The first stage is called ventilation. This involves the inhalation of oxygen and the exhalation of carbon dioxide. The destination for oxygen here is the alveolus, and in this stage, the destination for carbon dioxide is the outside air. The next stage is called external respiration, and this involves the exchange of gases between the alveolus and the pulmonary capillary. Here, the oxygen that has arrived at the alveolus diffuses across and enters the pulmonary capillary. The carbon dioxide that has been brought from the body cells leaves the pulmonary capillary and diffuses into the alveolus so that it can be breathed out. Once the oxygen has reached the capillary, it can now travel. It travels in the direction of the heart. It arrives at the heart via the pulmonary veins. So here we see the oxygen arriving via the pulmonary veins to the heart, and from the heart it can be pumped out via the aorta and taken to all parts of the body. The oxygen now arrives at the body cells. In the body cells, carbon dioxide is formed, and so carbon dioxide is released from the body cells, and it can be transported back to the lungs, first via the veins, systemic veins that take it to the heart, and then the pulmonary trunk that takes it to the alveolus. We call this stage transport. Oxygen is using systemic arteries to transport itself to the body cells, and carbon dioxide is using the systemic veins. The next stage is internal respiration, which is the exchange of gases that takes place between the systemic capillary and the body cells. Oxygen diffuses from the capillary to the body cells. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the body cells to the systemic capillary. The next stage and last stage is cellular respiration. The oxygen that has arrived in the body cells can now be used to break down glucose and make ATP. Carbon dioxide is the toxic byproduct. In this figure, we have on the right a normal lung, and on the left side, we have a collapsed lung. And this has to do with the differences in intrapleural pressure. So on the right lung, the intrapleural pressure is normal, and it is lower than intrapulmonary pressure. On the left side, the intrapleural pressure has increased for some reason, and its pressure is greater than intrapulmonary pressure, and this causes the lung to collapse. Another word for the collapsed lung is pneumothorax. Pneumos means air, and thorax means chest cavity. This means that air has entered the chest cavity, causing the intrapleural pressure to increase and collapsed lung. There is one type of trauma that can lead to a pneumothorax, and that is a knife wound to the chest. When there is a knife wound to the chest and the knife is removed from the point of entry, then air can enter the pleural cavity because the atmospheric air has a much higher pressure than the air in the intrapleural cavity. So the air enters the pleural cavity quite easily, causing the intrapleural pressure to go up. The intrapleural pressure now is greater than intrapulmonary pressure. This pressure pushes against the walls of the lung and collapses it. The treatment for the pneumothorax is to remove the excess air from the pleural cavity until the intrapleural pressure goes back to normal. So, in order to understand what all this has to do with alveoli, we need to talk about bubbles. So, let's take a look at bubbles. Let's imagine that these are small bubbles made out of pure water. This is pure water, and these are bubbles. Now, we all know that bubbles made out of pure water don't last very long. They burst because the water molecules that like each other, they try to stick to each other and they release the air inside. So they don't last very long. If you were to use pure water to wash your clothes will just get rinsed, but they won't get cleaned. The reason is that water molecules like each other too much and they don't enter the fibers of your garment. However, if you were to add soap, let's add some soap to this and you create large bubbles. And these large bubbles are basically water plus soap. What soap does is that it gets in between the water molecules and creates a larger bubble and a longer lasting bubble. Because the water molecules are separated from each other, they can actually enter the garments, the fiber of your garments, and actually clean them, which is why we use soap. Soap by itself cannot clean. All it does is that it separates the water molecules so the water molecules can actually get in and clean your fibers. So now if you were to imagine alveoli to be a bubble, we want the alveoli to be large. For the alveoli to be large, they need surfactant. Surfactant is a chemical that's produced inside the alveoli. So let's imagine this to be an alveolus. So this surfactant keeps the alveolus nice and big and expanded so that when you breathe in and breathe out, the alveoli do not collapse like a bubble. So more soap, bigger alveolus, and more soap, lower the surface tension. So the most important thing we need to remember here again is that the surfactant lowers the surface tension of water inside the alveolus, lowers the surface tension in the alveolus. So let's see how a premature baby or a neonate ends up with respiratory distress syndrome. So when a baby is premature, the lungs are underdeveloped and the level of surfactant production is quite low. When there is no surfactant or very little surfactant, the surface tension in the alveoli increases, is quite high. As a result, the lungs collapse because the alveoli collapse when exhalation takes place. We call this respiratory distress syndrome. The treatment for this is to administer surfactant through the trachea and using a tracheal tube, and the surface tension of the alveolus decreases, causing the alveoli to expand and go back to normal. Imagine that you are taking a deep breath and then jumping into a pool of water. You stay underwater for several seconds and then come up for air. You'll notice that you will be gasping for breath. This is not because you have run out of oxygen. This is because your body senses that there is way too much carbon dioxide accumulated in your blood. So it is the high levels of carbon dioxide in blood that induces your respiratory muscles to increase ventilation. So let's see how that happens. When the levels of carbon dioxide in blood go up, it activates chemoreceptors in the aorta and the common carotid artery. When these are activated, they in turn stimulate the medulla oblongata and the pons in the brainstem. Once these are activated, they in turn activate respiratory muscles such as the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles in your rib cage. These muscles increase ventilation, which brings carbon dioxide levels down and back to normal. At the same time, when the carbon dioxide levels increase, it also increases the hydrogen ion concentration in blood. In other words, your blood becomes more acidic. Your pH goes down. This drop in pH can be sensed by the medulla oblongata and pons directly, bringing about the same changes in the respiratory muscles, increase in ventilation, and lowering of carbon dioxide levels back to normal.